In the heart of a small, quiet American town, the doors of a local market opened for another day of work. Sarah, a 25-year-old woman, was behind the counter, organizing the merchandise and serving customers with a friendly smile. Every customer that passed by was treated with the same friendliness, and his willingness to help was noticed by everyone. Life in his small, routine world was marked by a dream that seemed distant: opening his own store one day. However, her precarious financial situation kept her stuck in a job that, although rewarding, did not offer her the freedom she so desired. While arranging some fruit on the shelf, Sarah looked around and felt the familiarity of the place. The market walls were adorned with colorful promotional posters, and the smell of fresh produce filled the air. She loved what she did, but something inside her yearned for more. With a sigh, she let her thoughts wander for a moment, imagining what it would be like to have her own store, a place where she could express her creativity and serve the community in an even more personal way. The day went on, and Sarah was busy serving customers, when she suddenly noticed a peculiar figure wandering among the shelves. He was an elderly man with white hair, with a confused expression on his face. He looked lost, like he was trying to find something he had no idea what it was. Sarah's curiosity was instantly sparked, and instead of ignoring him, she decided to get closer. "Hello, sir. Can I help with anything?" he asked, his voice soft and welcoming. The man turned, almost relieved to find someone who was willing to listen. He had a sad look, and the tension in his expression made it clear that he was dealing with something deeper than just momentary confusion. Good morning, young man. I'm trying to find some apples, but I can't remember where they are," he replied, his voice shaking slightly. "Of course, the apples are right there in the fruit section. Come on, I'll take you there," Sarah said, gesturing for him to follow her. As they walked, Sarah couldn't help but notice the way the man surveyed the shelves, as if each product was a distant memory. "Is your name?" she asked, trying to break the ice. "Thompson, Mr. Thompson," he replied, with a shy smile that barely lit up his tired face. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Thompson. I'm Sarah," she said, as she led him to the fruit section. "Here are the apples. Do you prefer the green ones or the red ones?" "The red ones. They remind me of my wife," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. There was a melancholy in the words that made Sarah's heart sink. "Your wife?" she asked softly as she picked up some apples and placed them in his cart. "Yes, we lost her a few months ago. Life has been difficult without her," Mr. Thompson replied, sadness showing in his eyes. Sarah felt a surge of compassion. She had heard stories of people facing loneliness after the loss of a loved one, but being in front of someone who experienced it touched her in a different way. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson. It must be very difficult," she said, her voice full of empathy. "If you need someone to talk to, know that I'm here." The elderly man looked at her with gratitude, as if her words were a balm for his wounded soul. "Thank you, Sarah. It's good to know there are still kind people out there. Sometimes loneliness weighs more than we can bear," he said, the emotion almost breaking his voice. "I understand. It's important to have someone to share the moments, good or bad." Sarah smiled, trying to offer a little comfort. "Can I come back to visit you sometime?" Mr. Thompson hesitated for a moment, as if the idea of a new friendship made him excited but also apprehensive. "It would be really good. Not many young people worry," he began, but his voice trailed off. "It would be a joy, really." Sarah felt an instant connection with the man. He wasn't just a client, but someone who was going through a difficult time, and she wanted to make a difference. "Then it's agreed. I'll come back for a coffee or a chat. I promise," she said, as she helped him put the apples in the cart. "Thank you very much, Sarah. You have no idea how much this means to me," he replied, a glimmer of hope appearing in his eyes. The sound of laughter and conversations filled the market, but at that moment, everything seemed calmer. Sarah and Mr. Thompson exchanged a few words about their lives, and she felt that even in the midst of everyday chaos, there was room for compassion and friendship. After helping him complete his shopping, Sarah said goodbye to him with a warm smile. As he walked away, She couldn't help but think about how a simple interaction could impact someone's life. In that instant, she realized that regardless of her financial situation, what really mattered were the connections we formed with others. But the day was far from over. As she returned to her workstation, something in her heart troubled her. The kindness she had shown might not be well received by everyone. The market had its rules, and although Sarah was used to following each of them, what she had done for Mr. Thompson could be seen as a transgression. However, she did not allow herself to be shaken by these thoughts. Life was too short to live in fear of being kind. When the last customer of the day left, Sarah said goodbye to her colleagues and went home, her heart a little lighter, and the hope that, perhaps, she could make a difference in Mr. Thompson's life. As I walked through the city's quiet streets, the sun slowly set, turning the sky orange and pink. Sarah reflected on the day and the conversation she had with the elderly man. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. She was determined to do what she could to help those around her. With her mind full of thoughts and her heart warmed by the kindness she had shared, Sarah felt like she had somehow found a new purpose. And who knows, maybe that purpose would take her down a path she never imagined. The day after meeting Mr. Thompson, the mood in the market was tense. Sarah, with her blue uniform and hair tied into a messy bun, was organizing the shelves of products when Mrs. Keller, the director of the establishment, entered with her authoritative air. The woman's firm and decisive steps echoed through the hallway, drawing the attention of employees and customers. "Sarah, come here, please," called Mrs. Keller, her voice cutting like a blade. Sarah felt butterflies in her stomach, but, maintaining her composure, approached the director. "Do you know why I'm here?" Mrs. Keller crossed her arms, her gaze fixed and defiant. "No, ma'am. What happened?" Sarah replied, trying to hide her anxiety. "I understand that you have been talking to a client, Mr. Thompson. I heard you left your duties to help him. This is unacceptable," Mrs. Keller said, her voice rising in pitch. "You disrespected company rules. Here we have protocols to follow, and you broke them by leaving the sector without authorization." Sarah frowned, confused. "But I just helped him. He looked lost and I thought it was the right thing to do." The sincerity in her voice didn't seem to have any effect on the director, who continued to look at her disapprovingly. "Do you think this is acceptable? We're not in the park here, Sarah. We need employees who do their jobs and follow the rules. You are not a social worker," Mrs. Keller responded, the coldness in her tone making it clear that the conversation was far from friendly. "I understand, but he was alone and I couldn't just ignore him," Sarah insisted, her voice shaking a little. Mrs. Keller's gaze, however, did not relent. "I don't want to hear any more justifications. You need to understand that your attitude can have consequences. I will need to speak to Mr. Thompson to clarify this situation." With that, the director turned and left, leaving Sarah in a mix of concern and indignation. She couldn't believe her good deed had put her in that position. Meanwhile, in the principal's office, Mrs. Keller sat at the table and picked up the phone. She quickly dialed, and after a few rings, Mr. Thompson's voice sounded on the other end. "Mr. Thompson, it's Mrs. Keller from the market. We need to talk about an incident involving one of our employees. Sarah, can you come here?" The tone of her voice was authoritative, and the content of the conversation made it clear that she had no good intentions. Minutes later, Mr. Thompson entered the room, his serene expression contrasting with the tension in the room. He was a man with white hair and gentle eyes, but the aura of respect he emanated was undeniable. "Mrs. Keller, what is this about?" "I am concerned about Sarah's behavior. She left her duties to help him, which I consider a violation of company rules. I wanted to know if you were offended in any way," said Mrs. Keller, trying to maintain her composure, but with a touch of disdain. "Offended? Not at all. Sarah was very kind to me. I was lost and she helped me find what I needed," Mr. Thompson responded, his voice warm and direct. "I don't see why this should be a problem." Mrs. Keller forced a smile. "The problem, Mr. Thompson, is that we need employees who follow company guidelines. We can't have people breaking the rules in the name of a good deed." "Disrespect the rules?" She just did what any human being should do. Help someone in need. Mr. Thompson insisted, crossing his arms. Her patience was wearing thin, and Mrs. Keller realized that the conversation was turning out unfavorably for her. With all due respect, Mr. Thompson, you may be a valuable customer to us, but this is a management issue. We need to maintain order, Mrs. Keller said, trying to regain control of the situation. What about kindness? What happened to empathy in this place? Sarah has shown more humanity than many here, he replied, the firmness in his voice causing Mrs. Keller to hesitate. That doesn't change the fact that she was out of her role. I can't just ignore this. I need to think about the good of the company. The director insisted, although her voice was losing strength. Mr. Thompson took a deep breath, realizing that Mrs. Keller was unyielding. If you fire Sarah, it will reflect much more on you and your management than on her. Kindness should be encouraged, not punished. Mrs. Keller paused, but soon recovered her posture. I appreciate your opinion, Mr. Thompson, but I need to make a decision that will maintain order in the market. I will consider your words, but I can't promise anything. She said goodbye abruptly, leaving Mr. Thompson even more worried about Sarah. Back in the produce department, Sarah was restless, wondering what could have happened in the conversation between Mrs. Keller and Mr. Thompson. The sound of the office door opening made his heart race. When Mrs. Keller came out, her look was filled with a seriousness that did not promise good news. Sarah, come with me. We need to talk again, called the director, and the young woman reluctantly followed her to the office. Upon entering, Sarah found Mr. Thompson already sitting, with a worried look on his face. Hi, Sarah, he said, trying to convey a sense of support, but the tension in the atmosphere was palpable. Mrs. Keller began to speak, her voice thick with authority. Sarah, due to yesterday's incident and your violation of company rules, I see no other option than to fire you. Those words hit Sarah like a blow. But I was just helping. I didn't want to cause trouble, she said, her voice cracking with disbelief. I understand, but we need to be clear about what is acceptable here. You cannot leave your duties without authorization. This is unacceptable, Ms. Keller said, without showing any empathy. But it was the right thing to do, Sarah insisted, fighting back tears. I just wanted to help. Sometimes doing the right thing has its consequences. I hope you understand that, Mrs. Keller replied with a coldness that cut off any hope of reconsideration. Mr. Thompson spoke out. Mrs. Keller, this is a big mistake. Sarah didn't deserve to be punished for her kindness. The community needs people like her. This is not an argument, Mr. Thompson. The decision has been made, Mrs. Keller finished, ignoring the elderly man's concern. Sarah left the office with a heavy heart, the feeling of desolation following her. She couldn't understand how her kindness had been turned into a reason for her dismissal. What hurt her most was the realization that, in this world, kindness seemed to be seen as weakness. What am I going to do now? He thought, sitting on one of the benches in the market, his head in his hands. Mr. Thompson approached, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Sarah, I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve this, he said, his voice soft. But don't let that get you down. You are an amazing person, and this will only be a temporary obstacle. She looked at him, her eyes full of tears, but also a spark of determination beginning to emerge. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I don't know what to do now. Let's talk. I have some ideas that might help you, he said, making Sarah feel a little hopeful. After all, even in the midst of sadness, kindness still found a way to shine. Sarah sat at a small table in a cafe, her hands shaking slightly around a mug of hot coffee. The aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the smell of cakes and bread coming out of the oven. But nothing seemed to be able to warm his heart at that moment. The dismissal was still a painful blow. She looked out the window, observing the bustle of the city she knew so well, but which now seemed strange and hostile. The cafe door opened and a blast of cold air rushed in, causing Sarah to pull her jacket closer to her body. Mr. Thompson, with his careful gait, entered, and when he saw Sarah, a smile lit up his face. He walked over and sat down in front of her. "Hi, Sarah. How are you?" he asked, his voice soft and encouraging. "I'm trying to recover," Sarah replied, looking at her coffee that was starting to get cold. "It was difficult to hear Mrs. Keller saying that I broke the rules. I just wanted to help." "You did what you thought was right," said Mr. Thompson firmly. "And that's what matters. Don't let this put you down. Life has ways of surprising us, even in the worst situations." She sighed. "But how can I move forward? Most markets don't want someone who was fired for misuse of duties. I just wanted to do the right thing." "Sometimes the right thing isn't the easiest thing," he replied, looking into her eyes. "But you have an incredible talent, Sarah. Your way of dealing with people, your kindness, that cannot be taught. Maybe it's time to think outside the box." His words echoed in Sarah's mind. "What do you mean?" "Maybe you can use your skills in another way. Have you ever thought about opening your own business? Make homemade sweets," Mr. Thompson suggested, a hopeful gleam in his eyes. "I know you make those delicious pies and cookies that everyone loves." "Well, I've always dreamed of opening a store, but I don't have the money or the necessary knowledge," Sarah said hesitantly. The idea seemed distant, a dream that she had kept in a corner of her heart. "Don't start limiting yourself now, Sarah. You can do this. Think about how you could sell your delicacies online. Nowadays, people are always looking for homemade and unique products. You could do something really special," encouraged Mr. Thompson. Sarah's heart started to beat faster. The idea intrigued her. "Do you think people would buy my candy? I never thought I could actually do this." "Not only do I think, I'm sure. And if you need help, I'm here to support you. I know some people who could help with the finances and logistics," he said, leaning forward, excitement evident in his voice. "Just imagine yourself doing what you love and being rewarded for it." Sarah felt a heat rise inside her. The idea of creating something of your own, of bringing joy to others through your creations, was exciting. "Do you really believe I can do this?" he asked, a gleam of hope lighting up in his eyes. "Yes, absolutely. And remember, it's not what happened that defines who you are. It's how you get up and move forward. Use that energy, that passion. You can turn this resignation into something positive," said Mr. Thompson, placing a hand gently on hers. "Don't give up on your dreams." With every word he said, Sarah felt a wave of determination rising within her. The conversation flowed, and soon ideas began to pop out of his mind. She started talking about flavors, packaging designs, and even how she could promote her sweets on social media. Mr. Thompson listened intently, taking notes and suggesting ideas she had never considered. "You could make an Instagram page and share photos of your products. People love to see the creation process. And who knows, maybe even make short videos showing how you make your recipes," he suggested excitedly. "That looks amazing. I've always loved watching recipe videos. And I could do some taste testing and ask for opinions on social media," Sarah said, growing excited. "I could use my kitchen space to start. And with the help of people like you, maybe I can really make it happen." "Exactly, Sarah. And don't forget, you must be authentic. People connect with stories and feelings. Share your journey, your struggles, and your victories," he encouraged. The conversation went on for hours, and the atmosphere in the cafe, which had previously seemed heavy, was now full of hope and possibilities. Sarah felt alive again, as if a new light had been turned on inside her. She looked at Mr. Thompson with great gratitude, realizing that he was not just a friend, but a mentor who was willing to help her achieve her dream. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I really don't know what I would do without you," Sarah said, feeling emotional. "No need to thank me, Sarah. I'm just doing what anyone would do for a friend. And I'm excited to see where this journey takes her," he replied, his gaze sincere and encouraging. When Sarah finally emerged from the cafe, the sky was beginning to darken, but the light shining within her was so bright that it seemed to illuminate the entire path in front of her. She took a deep breath, feeling the fresh, invigorating air. The idea of opening her own candy business now seemed like not just a distant dream, but a real possibility. And when she looked back, She saw Mr. Thompson waving at her, a smile on his face. "I'll do it," she whispered to herself, full of determination. She was ready to face the challenges ahead and, more importantly, she was ready to fight for her dreams. Sarah watched with a satisfied smile the movement around her small table set up in the city's central square. It was a sunny day and the light breeze brought with it the sweet smell of their products, which quickly spread through the air and attracted the attention of the residents. Since he started selling his homemade sweets, the community's reception had exceeded all his expectations. Every day, she felt more fulfilled and believed that she was walking the right path. "Did you do all this alone, Sarah? It's impressive," exclaimed a young woman named Emily, one of her colleagues who worked at the market before Sarah was fired. They had become friends during their time together, and Emily was excited about her friend's success. "Thank you, Emily. I'm really having a lot of fun with this. And you have no idea how good it is to see people enjoying what I do," replied Sarah, while arranging some packages of sweets that were about to be sold. "I'm going to take some to my mom. She will love it." Emily smiled, holding a jar of chocolate chip cookies. "You know Mrs. Keller is still trying to make you look like the villain in the story, right?" Sarah sighed. He knew that the former market manager would not rest until he belittled his work and achievements. What bothered her most was the way Mrs. Keller distorted the truth, spreading rumors that made her appear irresponsible and dishonest. But Sarah was determined not to let that get her down. "I know, but I can't let it affect me. I'm focused on what really matters now. And that is making my sweets and seeing people happy with them," said Sarah firmly. "You're right. After all, people are seeing your talent and not what Mrs. Keller is saying. And Mr. Thompson? He's supporting you, isn't he?" Emily questioned, watching the elderly man approaching the table. "Yes, he has been a great help. He believes in me and my vision. Without him, I don't know if I would have had the courage to start all this," replied Sarah, with gratitude in her eyes. Mr. Thompson, with his calm gait and straw hat, approached and smiled when he saw Sarah. "Good morning, my young entrepreneur. How are sales today?" he asked, a gleam of pride in his eyes. "Great, Mr. Thompson. I can't believe how much people are enjoying my sweets," she replied, beaming. "And your help has been fundamental. Thank you for believing in me." "Ah, my dear, you have an undeniable talent, and your kindness and determination are what really make the difference. I'm here to support you whenever you need it," he said, placing a comforting hand on your shoulder. While they were talking, a group of teenagers approached the table, attracted by the smell of sweets. "What do you have here, Sarah?" asked one of them, curiosity shining in his eyes. "Chocolate cookies, brownies, and some vanilla cupcakes. Everything was done with great care," she replied, making an amplifying gesture with her hands. "Can I try a brownie?" asked a girl in the group with a mischievous smile. "Of course. Here it is. Tell me what you think," Sarah said, handing over the candy. The girl took a piece to her mouth and her eyes lit up. "Wow, this is incredible. You need to sell more of these," she exclaimed, making the other teens laugh and agree. It was at that moment that Sarah realized that her work was expanding beyond simple sales. People were connecting with her products, and it filled her with joy. As the teens sampled the sweets, she turned to Mr. Thompson. "Do you think I should think of a way to expand my business? Maybe sell elsewhere?" she asked, a little hesitantly. "Why not? What do you have in mind?" he replied, encouraging her. "Maybe I can offer to make sweets for parties and events, or even open a small space in a local cafe," Sarah said, excited about the idea. "That sounds like a great plan. You have everything to be successful, Sarah. And remember, I'm here to help you every step of the way," he reaffirmed, with a sincere look. However, Mrs. Keller's shadow loomed over Sarah. Even though she had changed direction, the former manager's words still echoed in her mind, creating a subtle insecurity. She needed to show that she was capable of overcoming adversity, and this motivated her even more. Later, while organizing the candy boxes, Sarah heard some women talking nearby. "Did you see how Mrs. Keller is talking bad about Sarah? Says she should never have been fired in the first place," one commented. "Yes, but who needs it?" Sarah is doing a great job, and I would support her anywhere, the other woman responded, with a defensive tone. Sarah felt her heart warm when she heard those words. The community was rallying behind him. As the weeks went by, her clientele only grew, and she felt more confident with each new day. However, Mrs. Keller was not willing to leave her alone. As soon as he realized that Sarah's success was growing, he decided to act more aggressively. One sunny morning, Sarah was approached by a group of customers who were visibly worried. "Sarah, have you heard the rumors that are going around? Mrs. Keller is saying that you are not trustworthy and that your products are not safe," a woman said, her face pale. "I can't believe she's still doing this. What did I do to deserve this?" Sarah asked, feeling frustration rising. "Don't worry about it, Sarah. What matters is that we know the truth. You are a great person and your sweets are delicious," a man in the group said, trying to comfort her. "Yes, you have earned the trust of the community. Don't let one unwise person ruin this," another customer added. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the pressure increase. "Thanks, guys. I really appreciate your support. I will continue doing what I love, regardless of what Mrs. Keller says," she stated, resolutely. With support from Mr. Thompson and the community, Sarah began planning a special event where she could showcase her products more widely. At the same time, Ms. Keller continued her disinformation campaign, but Sarah decided not to let it get her down. If there was one thing he had learned since leaving the industry, it was that his passion and determination were more powerful than any rumor. "I'm going to organize a sweets fair at the market where everyone can try and buy my products. And I want to invite the whole community," she announced to Mr. Thompson, who looked at her with pride. "It's a brilliant idea. Let's make this happen. You can count on me to help publicize the event," he said, pledging to be your mentor and support. With each small victory, Sarah became stronger. She wouldn't let one person's negativity stop her from achieving her dreams. And, with the help of friends and allies, he was about to take an important step toward the future he always wanted. The day of the event had finally arrived, and Sarah woke up with a mix of anxiety and expectation. Sunlight filtered through the curtains of her small kitchen, illuminating the glass jars full of homemade sweets that she had so lovingly prepared. Every detail of the event had been carefully planned, from the decoration to the selection of products she would present. She wanted everything to be perfect, not just for her but also for Mr. Thompson, who had supported her unconditionally from the beginning. As she got ready, Sarah couldn't help but think about the recent upheaval in her life. The layoff from the market had left her devastated, but Mr. Thompson's help had lit a spark of hope. He wasn't just a friend. He was a mentor, someone who believed in your potential. Now he had the opportunity to show the community what he was really capable of. "You can do it, Sarah. Remember what I always say, your hard work will pay off," Mr. Thompson's encouraging voice said in her mind, as she looked in the mirror, adjusting her hair. Arriving at the event location, his heart skipped a beat when he saw the tables decorated with colorful tablecloths, balloons, and products lined up. She had put so much love into each candy, she felt they could almost speak for themselves. The presence of his friends, who had arrived earlier to help with the organization, brought relief. They were there, ready to support her, and it gave her the strength she needed. "Sarah, everything is amazing. You really outdid yourself," exclaimed Lisa, a close friend, as she adjusted the candy trays. "Thank you, Lisa. I just hope people like it," Sarah replied, trying to hide the anxiety that was pulsing inside her. As the start time approached, more people began to arrive. Sarah watched with a nervous smile as the familiar faces gathered around her, all excited to try their delicacies. Mr. Thompson arrived punctually, with an encouraging smile and a look that conveyed confidence. "You look radiant, Sarah. The event will be a success. I can feel it," he said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I just want everything to be perfect," he replied, feeling some of the weight of pressure on his shoulders. He nodded, and together, they began interacting with the guests, presenting the products and sharing stories about each of them. The audience seemed delighted, and the cheers began to flow. "These brigadeiros are the best I've ever eaten," exclaimed a lady, putting a piece in her mouth. "How do you do that?" Sarah smiled, satisfied. "It's my grandmother's recipe. Whenever I do it, I remember her." "I'm glad you liked it." The atmosphere was light and full of laughter, and Sarah began to feel like all the effort had been worth it. The compliments kept piling up, and with each positive word, his confidence grew more and more. She was finally doing something she loved and being recognized for it. However, as the party progressed, an unwanted presence began to approach. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she saw Mrs. Keller crossing the room, her gaze sharp and critical. The market director, who had been responsible for Sarah's dismissal, seemed to be there with the intention of belittling the event. "Look, who would have thought that the former employee would be organizing an event?" commented Mrs. Keller with a sarcastic smile, which did not go unnoticed. "I hope everyone is having a good time with these. What's it like? Homemade sweets?" The murmur of disapproval spread among the guests, and Sarah's heart sank. She didn't want Mrs. Keller to ruin her moment. But before he could react, Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his gaze steady and determined. "Excuse me, Mrs. Keller, but what you are doing here is not welcome. This event is a celebration of Sarah's hard work and resilience. She doesn't need your negativity," he said, his voice echoing around the room. Sarah was surprised by Mr. Thompson's attitude. He had always been gentle and diplomatic, but now his defense was clear and powerful. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of gratitude and admiration. "I'm not here to cause trouble, just observing the creativity of a former employee," Mrs. Keller retorted, but her expression already showed signs of discomfort. Sarah is not just any former employee. She is a go-getter and deserves respect for her efforts. Her products are being very well received, and people recognize the value she brings to the community. Contrary to what you did, Sarah is someone who truly cares about others," Mr. Thompson continued, with a passion that made everyone around stop and listen. The silence in the room was palpable, and Mrs. Keller, realizing she was losing the battle, gave her a dismissive look but said nothing more. Sarah, on the other hand, felt more confident than ever. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. This means a lot to me," Sarah said, her eyes shining with excitement. "You deserve it, Sarah. And remember, true strength comes from within. Keep fighting for what you believe in," he replied, before walking away to greet more guests. The event continued, and the energy was contagious. Sarah realized that Mr. Thompson's presence and the support of his friends were making everything even more special. People were happy, and she was doing what she loved. As the night progressed, Sarah received several requests for partnerships and collaborations. More than that, she felt like she was actually building something meaningful, not just for herself, but for her community. She was redeeming herself and at the same time showing everyone that kindness and perseverance really do pay off. As the party drew to a close, Sarah looked around, taking in the joy and positive energy that surrounded her. She knew that this was just the beginning of a new journey, and she was ready to face it with courage and love. The air was thick with anticipation as the crowd slowly dispersed after the event. Sarah, exhausted but radiant, observed the interactions around her. The compliments on his products still echoed in his mind, fueling his self-confidence. However, the presence of Mrs. Keller, who approached with an expression of contempt, made his heart quicken. "Do you really think this will give you a chance?" Mrs. Keller shot back with a sarcastic smile. "People will soon forget you and what you did. After all, there's not much to admire in a business based on homemade sweets." Before Sarah could respond, Mr. Thompson, who had been silent beside her, stepped forward. His gaze was firm and his tone authoritative. "I think you're mistaken, Mrs. Keller. What's happening here is a testament to Sarah's kindness and dedication. She didn't just make candy. She brought the community back to our market." Mrs. Keller was stunned, but quickly recovered. "And who are you exactly to question my authority here? An old man who got lost along the way while shopping?" Mr. Thompson, with dignified calm, replied. "Actually, I'm Mr. Thompson, a well-known investor in the food industry. And if you'll allow me, I've been watching Sarah since the first day she helped me. Her passion and determination are remarkable, and I admire her, that's why." The murmur of the crowd grew louder, and admiring glances turned to Mr. Thompson. Mrs. Keller, realizing the situation was stacking against her, tried to change tactics. "Investor or not, that doesn't change the fact that you can't just ignore company rules." Sarah was disloyal. "Disloyal?" replied Mr. Thompson with a raised eyebrow. "The only disloyalty I see here is yours. You have put your own ambitions above the well-being of your employees and the community. This is mismanagement, and I have a record to prove it." Silence reigned for a moment as Mr. Thompson's words echoed in the minds of those present. Mrs. Keller, who had always seen herself as an unshakable figure, now seemed vulnerable. The murmur turned into shouts of support for Sarah, and the crowd began to gather around her. "Sarah, Sarah, you're the best!" shouted a regular customer, as others joined in the cheers. Sarah's heart was beating fast, not just from the adrenaline, but from the feeling of justice that finally seemed to come to fruition. Mrs. Keller, realizing she had lost control of the situation, tried to walk away, but Mr. Thompson stopped her. "It's time for you to answer for your actions, Miss Keller. You can't just treat people like pieces on a chessboard. Your management has failed, and the community is aware of it. I will make sure this information gets to those who need it to know." He turned to Sarah, a warm smile lighting up his face. "Sarah, you don't know how much I admire your courage. You deserve more than what you've been offered so far. I would like to propose something that could change your life." Sarah's eyes lit up. "What do you have in mind, Mr. Thompson?" He took a deep breath, as if he was about to make a big announcement. "I'm planning to open a new market in the city, a space that not only sells products, but is also a hub for the community. I want you to be the manager of this market. You will have complete freedom to implement your ideas and bring your vision to life." Life. His words rang in her ears like music. Sarah could hardly believe her ears. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Absolutely. I see enormous potential in you, and it's time for you to shine. Let's work together and make this market a special place for everyone." The crowd began to applaud, and Sarah felt a wave of gratitude and happiness overcome her. "I accept," she exclaimed, and the applause intensified. Mrs. Keller, now visibly angry, looked like she was about to explode. "This is ridiculous. You are making a colossal mistake," he shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the community's applause. With a wave of his hand, Mr. Thompson called for silence. "Mrs. Keller, your time here is over. The community has risen up against your injustices, and I will not remain silent. From today onwards, you will no longer have a place in the management of this market." Mrs. Keller, furious, turned and left, leaving behind a trail of discontented murmurs. The crowd began to disperse, but not before Sarah was surrounded by friends and customers congratulating her. "I'm so happy for you, Sarah. You really deserve this," said an elderly customer, with tears of joy in her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without Mr. Thompson's help," Sarah replied, looking at the man who supported her unconditionally. "Really? Thank you so much for believing in me. You've done it all, Sarah. Now it's time for you to show the world what you're capable of." He smiled, his gaze full of encouragement. With the support of Mr. Thompson and the community behind her, Sarah felt like she was finally on the right path. Doors were opening, and his dream of owning his own business was about to become a reality. She could finally show that kindness and determination could lead to great achievements. As the sun began to set, turning the sky orange and pink, Sarah looked around, feeling a mix of gratitude and hope. The small town, which had previously seemed like a limited and oppressive place, now seemed full of possibilities. And with a new market under construction, she was determined to make it a place where kindness and community reign. "Let's go together, my friend," she said to Mr. Thompson with a beaming smile. "Let's do something amazing." And so, with renewed courage and a promising future ahead, Sarah took the first step towards her dream, surrounded by the community that now supported her and the mentor who believed in her when no one else did. Sarah's story was just beginning, and she was ready to write each chapter with determination, kindness, and success.